Welcome to episode 11 of the Autumn Berkman Show. Today we're going to be talking about the fallout from the presidential debate. Let's go ahead and dive right in. For cultural conversations, we're going to jump into the debate fallout. So let's start with some good news from the debate. The moderators of the debate actually did a good job. There was not one instance of a moderator arguing with a candidate or attacking a candidate. I didn't necessarily love every question, but some good questions were asked from each of the candidates. But let's get into some specific moments of content that we can talk about. So first, we're going to listen to a little bit about abortion.
51 years ago, you had Roe v. Wade, and everybody wanted to get it back to the states. Everybody, without exception. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. Everybody wanted it back. Religious leaders. And what I did is I put 3 great Supreme Court justices on the court, and they happened to vote in favor of killing Roe v. Wade and moving it back to the states. This is something that everybody wanted. The problem they have is they're radical because they will take the life of a child in the 8th month, the 9th month, and even after birth. After birth, if you look at the former governor of Virginia, he was willing to do this. He said, we'll put the baby aside and we'll determine what we do with the baby, meaning we'll kill the baby. What happened is we brought it back to the states, and the country is now coming together on this issue. It's been a great thing.
All right, so there is a lot to unpack there. So some people will take this statement and then they'll say, well, both Trump and Biden support abortion. And I don't agree with Trump's stance. I don't agree with supporting abortion pills. But I also don't agree that Trump and Biden are equal in this issue. Right? Biden clearly said later that he supports Roe v. Wade, and Trump very clearly states that he's glad we're not in the Roe v. Wade era anymore, and now the states can decide. So now that the states are able to decide, pro-life groups can advocate in their state, and we can make restrictions, and children's lives can be saved. So Trump wants this. He wants the states to have this ability. He wants the ability to restrict abortions. So while I do agree with pro-life advocates like Lila Rose, we can't go so far as to say that both candidates are equal on this issue, and there's clearly a big difference in what they support. So allowing states to restrict abortion still allows pro-life advocates to lobby for restrictions at the state level. So I think it's really important that we understand that distinction between the two viewpoints with Trump and Biden. You also saw that Trump mentions infanticide, and there is some validity to his claim, and we're actually going to talk about that a little bit more in our next segment. But before we get to that, we're going to jump now to talk about the environment.
President Trump, will you take any action as president to slow the climate crisis?
So I want absolutely immaculate clean water, and I want absolutely clean air, and we had it. We had H2O. We had the best numbers ever, and we were using all forms of energy, all forms, everything. And yet, during my 4 years, I had the best environmental numbers ever. And my top environmental people gave me that statistic just before I walked on the stage, actually.
I passed the most extensive climate change legislation in history. Out of the Paris Climate Accord, I immediately joined it, because if we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius at any one point, there's no way back. The only existential threat to humanity is climate change.
All right, so huge contrast between Trump and Biden and the way that they approach this issue. So you can see when Trump is engaging about what he's doing for the environment, his measures of success are we had clean air, we had clean water, we were using all forms of energy. So actual situations that affect people's lives, that's his metric for success. And then we see Biden, on the other hand, he's using that he asked for extensive legislation, that he joined the Paris Climate Accords to prove his success. So I just ask you, which measure of success do you want a president to be thinking about? Do you want his success to be how the policies actually affect your life? Or do you want the measure of success to be the optics of the decision, how the U.S. looks to other nations in terms of how well we're taking care of the climate? We're going to jump now to another topic. We're going to go to inflation.
What do you say to Black voters who are disappointed with the progress so far?
I say I don't blame them for being disappointed. Inflation is still hurting them badly. For example, I provided for the idea that any black family first-time home buyer should get a $10,000 tax credit to be able to buy their first home so they can get started. I made sure that we're in a situation where all those black families and those black individuals who provided had to take out student loans that were ballooning, that if they were engaged in nursing, doctor, and anything having to do with volunteerism, if they paid their bills for 10 years on their student debt, all the rest was forgiven after 10 years. Millions have benefited from that. And we're going to do a whole lot more for black families.
Thank you, President Trump.
And he caused the inflation. He's blaming inflation, and he's right, it's been very bad. He caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families and just about everybody.
All right, so here the context of this question is they were asked about African American voters and what they're going to do for them if they, how they would respond based on the disappointment that they feel. So you can see Biden's talking about inflation and how bad it is before he's talking about a couple of things that he did to help. But Trump just jumps on that and is like, yes, it's inflation. So there were moments like this in the debate where Biden would really sound like he was agreeing with Trump and talking about how terrible things are now and what he would do to improve them. And right here, he mentioned that inflation is terrible. Well, and if that's the case, then it's like, why aren't you fixing it now? Why do you need to wait until after you're elected? And of course, this is going to be the struggle for any incumbent president. You have to prove that you've done a great job and also gather support for the things that you're going to do. In the case of Biden, it's even more difficult because so many people are struggling now and so many people are recognizing inflation now, right? Not just in minority communities, but really everyone in America. I mean, inflation, right, doesn't care what your background is. If their money is being devalued, it's going to influence everybody using our currency. So Biden did not successfully garner the confidence that we can trust him to get us through it, as many times in the debate he would make statements like this one, which really show how things aren't really going so well right now. Now, one big topic that Trump really brought up many times was the issue of our border. So let's jump to that conversation.
Have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch, overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that are from mental institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now, all terrorists, all over the world, not just in South America, all over the world. They come from the Middle East, everywhere. All over the world, they're pouring in. And this guy just left it open. And he didn't need legislation because I didn't have legislation. I said, close the border. We had the safest border in history. In that final couple of months of my presidency, we had, according to Border Patrol, who is great, and by the way, who endorsed me for president, but I won't say that, but they endorsed me for president. Brandon, just speak to him. But look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. And people are dying all over the place, including the people that are coming up in caravans.
President Trump.
So much that we could talk about with this border issue. I'll just quick say that we are going to talk about the whole Border Patrol controversy in our next segment. But Trump repeatedly went back to this issue. They asked a question later about opioids, and he brought it back to this same issue, with just the border that's significantly open, and that is a contributing factor to the drug epidemic. And it seems to me that Democrats really want to still push this narrative that everyone coming through the border is just a nice person that's looking for a better life. But this has repeatedly been proven false. If you just look at the news and you see stories of rape and you see stories of murder, and this is happening from illegal immigrants, and sometimes it's ones who have been already arrested before and have been released again. And it just shows that, right, what we're doing is not working. It's not adequate. And how many times do these crimes need to be committed before it's finally adequate justification for closing the border? So you can see a huge contrast there. Again, Biden's bringing up legislation. That's his argument to say that he's doing a good job. He's not really talking about what's actually happening in people's lives, if people are safer, if the issues that are going on are being dealt with. That's just not what he's talking about, versus Trump is talking about, right, people's safety, who's coming into our nation, and what's actually going on. So just that contrast between what's their metric for success, you can see a huge difference in that. There are so many other topics that were brought out that we could dive into. So this is just a little taste of a few of the things that they talked about. But unfortunately, in the aftermath of the debate, the reality is that none of the policies that I just brought up really matter at all, at least according to the news and what's talked about now. The big fallout of the debate is the response to Biden, as a lot of people just didn't realize that President Biden doesn't have the physical stamina, the physical, presence to show that he's really robust and healthy and ready to go. I mean, there's a huge contrast between Biden and Trump in terms of how they sound, how confident they come across, how emotional they get when they get really defensive about stuff, and just the times that Biden really had a lot of blunders in terms of what he said and kind of stammering over his words. That really just didn't happen to Trump at all. He was really just present the whole time. So we see that aftermath, people kind of panicking, wondering if President Biden is going to actually run again. There's still some debate as to whether or not they're going to try to put up a different candidate at the end. So we'll just have to stay tuned and see what happens. But unfortunately, all of this talk about policy just isn't really what everyone's talking about now. They're just talking about the cognitive abilities of both of our leaders. But I think as voters, we want to be different and not just follow the mainstream. We want to take the time to actually go into what policies will these candidates support, and take a step further and think about how will those policies actually impact people's lives. So we're voting for the person who's going to give us the nation that we want. Up next, we're going to jump into some crazy news. In the aftermath of the debate, instead of debating who has the best policies, like we said before, the immediate jump is who was the biggest liar. So this would be the other piece of fallout that's happening from the debate, in addition to the cognitive decline being noticed in President Biden. So we're going to jump to this AP News article. And there's many like this. This is just one example called "Here's a Look at Some of the False Claims Made During Biden and Trump's First Debate." So then we see all of these fact checks, right? And we're supposed to just believe, of course, that whoever wrote this article is the one who holds the truth to all of the facts, and that their take on this is absolute reality. Now, occasionally they actually give you enough information where you can understand the situation better and kind of get some more context about it, but often the perspective is tainted by the obvious leanings of the fact checker. So if we scroll down here, there is one they talk about the environment. So here we go, climate change. Trump, touting his environmental record, said that during my 4 years I had the best environmental numbers ever, and that he supports immaculate air and water. So they say that's far from the whole story, but if you look at this paragraph, they don't actually have any data to disprove it. They don't have a different time period with different facts about water or different facts about air. They just kind of say that's not true and move on. They're saying it again based on legislation that was enacted or not enacted. So we have to remember to take that step further and say, well, is the legislation enforced properly? What's actually the effect of the legislation? Because we've given examples on this podcast about legislation that has some misleading names. And again, they bring up the Paris Accords as if that is the end-all be-all of making the environment better. But President Trump brought up in the debate that the Paris Accords were really unfairly putting a lot of the burden of responsibility on the United States, when if we're going to take this perspective that everybody's contributing to what's happening to the globe, then if that's going to work, then we need to get the industrial nations involved in the world to be on board. It couldn't just be something that the U.S. is involved with. But again, this is just an example to show you the fact checkers here obviously have their own slant of what they think it means to make the environment better, and that slant is coming out when they choose to confirm or deny a fact as being accurate. Another issue that is brought up in this particular article is January 6th. Trump said in the debate they talk about a relatively small number of people that went to the Capitol and in many cases were ushered in by the police. So according to the fact checkers, that is false, and they call this the deadliest assault on the seat of American power in over 200 years. So obviously that's through their lens, through their viewpoint of how they're taking this and what they interpreted to happen. There's a lot of debate about how this January 6th event actually happened and why so many people were in there, and if some of those people who were there were actually Trump supporters or were maybe planted by the other side. So there's a lot of different stories out there, and I don't know which one is the most accurate story, but to just say, just take this at face value, like, I'm not going to just buy whatever the fact checker says. Now, what's interesting is that we have a Supreme Court ruling about a January 6th case. So this is from Supreme Court of the U.S. blog, and it's called Justice's Rule for January 6th Defendant. That just came out June 28th, 2024. First full paragraph states the Supreme Court on Friday threw out the charges against a former Pennsylvania police officer who entered the U.S. Capitol during the January 6, 2021 attacks. By a vote of 6-3, the justices ruled that the law that Joseph Fisher was charged with violating, which bars obstruction of an official proceeding, applies only to evidence tampering, such as destruction of records or documents in official proceedings. Now, the next sentence states Friday's ruling could affect charges against more than 300 other January 6 defendants. Now, it sounds like good news for those people who may have been falsely charged. But if we go down to the bottom, there's another statement here. It says, in a statement, Attorney General Merrick Garland indicated that he was disappointed by the ruling, but he stressed that the vast majority of the more than 1,400 defendants charged for their illegal actions on January 6 will not be affected by this decision. So we can see there's some different debate still about the aftermath of January 6th, and there's still debate about these court cases, about what they've been charged with. So this is by no means a settled issue. So again, just an example to show that these fact checkers will very often make it seem like they really know what's going on, but there's really a lot that we don't know and a lot that's still being determined about this particular event. So the issue with fact-checking is based on what narrative you believe. If your viewpoint doesn't align with the fact-checkers, then their writing really just won't help you very much. Now, another issue that I said I would bring up with you from the previous segment was the issue of infanticide. So this is from the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. This article is from 2019. Now, I personally remember this issue being in the news. I remember there being debate and discussion about whether or not people are supporting infanticide. So this isn't something that Trump just made up or wanted to just make the issue seem worse than it was. This was actually something that people were debating and were deliberating. And this article brings up some of the specifics there. He says here, it says, affirming the extreme position that has stained the mainstream of American discourse on abortion. Ms. Tran says my bill would allow that. Yes, and that's allowing abortion at the point of delivery. So then it goes on to say, this is why decisions such as this should be made by providers, physicians, and the mothers and fathers that are involved, Northam said. When we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physician, more than one physician, by the way, and it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's non-viable. He goes on and says, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. Right, so this definitely is saying that it's not a guarantee that the child would receive care. This is still something that is up for deliberation, and this is after delivery. So here, this is what Trump was referring to when he was in the debate. So this is really happened. There really are people who would push the law this far to allow a child who's born alive, maybe from an attempted abortion, but still they're born alive, would allow that child to be left to die or to not receive the care that they need in order to recover. And this is obviously unacceptable, should never be okay. And so that's really the point Trump was making, is that we don't want this. We want states to be able to put in restrictions, and we don't want to be anywhere near anything like this. But there really are people who are willing to go so far as this. All right, one other fact check I just want to bring up has to do with the border. So Biden claimed that he was endorsed by Border Patrol, and Trump denied that claim. But Border Patrol actually stood up themselves. So Border Patrol Union, NBPC, this is their account on X or on Twitter, whatever you call it. And they said here, their pinned tweet says, to be clear, we never have and never will endorse Biden. So they just posted that right during the debate, immediately cleared that one up. So some of these things you really can fact check and determine whether or not they are true. But just a note for the wise to be wary anytime someone says they are a fact checker, that doesn't really mean that they know what they're talking about. And we're going to end off our show today with a random reaction.
What's your age?
22.
Are you single?
No.
How long you had a man?
5 years.
And how long have you had a baby?
She's almost 2.
Was it with him or with somebody else?
Him.
So how much does he have to make to take care of you and your daughter?
At least $1,000 a month.
$1,000 a month?
Food, groceries, car insurance, diapers, wipes.
Now, how much would you say a man has to make annually to take care of a family of 3?
Annually, overall, at least 30 grand a year.
On just a baby? Or,
Every expense you would need for a stay-at-home mom and a child.
but if he's spending $30K a year on both you and your daughter, how much more would he need to make to live comfortably?
Oh, we are comfortable. That's comfortable.
So a family of 3 could survive off of just $40K a year?
Yeah. It's just not going to be a lavish lifestyle. But this economy sucks.
So you just make it work?
Yeah.
So I love that video. I think it just really contrasts the narrative people want to put out, that it's just impossible for a mother to stay home, that it's just impossible to survive and thrive. And I know that there's legitimate struggles and there's difficulty in our economy, but when you really want to prioritize your family and your home, you're going to find a way to make it work. You might not have new cars, you might not have the biggest house, you might not have all the new games and trinkets and things for your kids that you might want to buy to keep up with everybody else, but you can still live. You can still make it work and make it happen. And what I love about this particular story is that they also were married young, and that they, have been together for 5 years and are growing their family. And I think, again, that's just a contrast to this narrative that says, you have to have everything established first, you have to have an education first, you have to have everything, financially worked out already. And, you need to be responsible. I'm not saying to be reckless, but you don't have to have everything mapped out and figured out. You just need to be able to be responsible and to manage what you have and use it wisely. And you can do this. You can get married young, focus on your family, establish your home, and make things thrive, and just, take care of yourself and your own. Thanks for joining us for the Autumn Berkman Show. I hope that you enjoyed our episode, and I look forward to reading your comments and hearing your thoughts. And remember to live in truth.